She was skin and bones, barely breathing, buried in trash. Most people would have walked away, but I couldn't. That moment changed everything. I didn't know it then, but I was about to meet someone who would teach me more about resilience, trust, and healing than I ever thought possible. It was one of those afternoons that felt like the world had stopped moving. The sun hung in the sky like a molten coin, casting a harsh, unrelenting light over everything. The air was thick with humidity, the kind that makes your clothes cling to your skin and your breath feel heavy. I had taken a detour through a forgotten part of town, a place where time seemed to have given up. Cracked sidewalks, rusted fences, and graffiti-covered walls lined the streets. It was a shortcut I rarely used, but something about that day pulled me there. As I passed an illegal dumping ground, the stench hit me like a physical force. It was a nauseating blend of rotting food, burnt plastic, rusted metal, and something else, something sour and unmistakably organic. Flies buzzed in thick, angry clouds, and the ground was a chaotic mess of broken glass, old tires, and discarded furniture. I was about to quicken my pace when something caught my eye. At first I thought it was a pile of rags, but then it moved, just barely. I squinted through the haze and stepped closer. That's when I saw her. She was curled up in a tight ball, half buried in trash. Her fur was so matted and filthy that it was hard to tell what color it had once been. Her body was skeletal. Every rib, every vertebra, every joint jutted out like a grotesque sculpture of suffering. Her eyes, though, were what stopped me. They were dull, sunken, and lifeless. But behind the exhaustion, there was a flicker, a whisper of a will to live. She didn't bark. She didn't growl. She didn't even flinch. She just looked at me as if asking, "Are you going to leave me too?" I crouched down slowly, careful not to startle her. "Hey girl, it's okay," I whispered. My voice cracked. I reached into my bag and pulled out a piece of bread. She sniffed it, then, with agonizing slowness, began to chew. Each bite looked like it took every ounce of strength she had left. That was the moment I knew. I couldn't leave her there. I found an old towel nearby and gently wrapped her in it. She was so light it felt like lifting a bundle of feathers. She didn't resist. She didn't even whimper. It was as if she had already accepted her fate, and this, whatever it was just another chapter in her suffering. The drive home was quiet. She lay on the passenger seat, her head resting on the towel, her breathing shallow and uneven. I kept glancing over, terrified that she might slip away before we even got there. At the farmhouse, I laid her on a soft blanket in the kitchen and offered her water. She drank slowly, cautiously, as if unsure whether it was real. I called the local vet who came by that evening. His face turned grim the moment he saw her. "Severe malnutrition, dehydration, skin infections, and open wounds," he said. "But no major viruses. That's a miracle." We cleaned her wounds, applied ointments, and gave her antibiotics. She didn't fight us. She just lay there, watching with those tired eyes. We named her Lucky, because from that moment on, she would be. The first few days were a blur of worry and hope. I fed her with a syringe, tiny amounts of broth and soft food every few hours. Her stomach couldn't handle much. She vomited often, and each time, my heart sank. But she never gave up. She kept trying. Her skin was raw and inflamed. I bathed her gently with medicated shampoo, careful not to hurt her. She trembled, not from fear, but from sheer exhaustion. Yet she never once growled or snapped. It was as if she understood we were trying to help. She slept most of the time, curled up in a corner of the kitchen, but now and then she'd lift her head and look around, as if trying to remember what safety felt like. I'd sit beside her, reading aloud or just talking. I wanted her to hear kindness, to know she wasn't alone anymore. After a week, her condition plateaued. She wasn't getting worse, but she wasn't getting better either. The vet suggested we take her to a larger animal hospital in the city, so we rented a car and drove over 100 kilometers. The hospital staff were shocked by her condition. They ran tests and confirmed a severe bacterial skin infection, likely caused by prolonged exposure to filth and untreated wounds. The treatment was intense. Every wound had to be cleaned thoroughly. Some required minor surgical procedures. It was painful, But Lucky didn't flinch. She lay still, eyes closed, as if surrendering to the process. "She's got a will to live," one of the vets said, and she did. We made that trip every day for nearly 2 weeks. Each time she seemed a little stronger. She started eating on her own. Her eyes became brighter. Her tail wagged, just a little, but it was there. That tiny wag felt like a victory. When she was finally discharged, she had gained nearly 7 pounds. Her fur was still patchy, but her skin was healing. Back at the farmhouse, we continued her care, daily medication, wound cleaning, and lots of love. And slowly, Lucky began to change. She started exploring the yard. She chased butterflies. She barked at birds. She even tried to play with the other dogs. Her personality blossomed, curious, gentle, and surprisingly goofy. She loved belly rubs. She'd roll over and nudge your hand if you stopped. She followed me everywhere, her eyes always watching, always grateful. She had a favorite spot on the porch where she'd lie in the sun, her head resting on her paws, eyes half closed in contentment. Sometimes she'd fall asleep there, snoring softly. Other times she'd watch the world go by, her tail thumping lazily against the wood. One evening, a thunderstorm rolled in. The sky turned dark, and the wind howled through the trees. Thunder cracked like a whip, and rain pounded the roof. I found Lucky trembling under the kitchen table, her eyes wide with fear. I sat with her, wrapped her in a blanket, and whispered soothing words until she calmed down. It was a reminder that healing isn't linear. Trauma leaves scars, and sometimes the past comes rushing back. But each time it did, we faced it together. Months passed. Lucky's coat grew thick and shiny. Her eyes sparkled with mischief. She ran, she played, she loved. She greeted visitors with a wagging tail and a happy bark. She napped in the sun, sprawled out like royalty. She even became a bit of a local celebrity. People came by just to see her, to hear her story. She had a way of making people pause. Strangers would kneel down to pet her, and she'd lean into their touch as if saying, "It's okay, I'm safe now." Children adored her. Elderly neighbors brought her treats. She became a symbol of hope in our little community, and in saving her, I found something too. A reminder that compassion can change lives, that even the most broken souls can heal with love, patience, and care. Lucky taught me about resilience, not just hers, but mine too. She reminded me that hope is never truly lost. Sometimes it just needs a second chance. There were days when I'd sit on the porch, watching her chase shadows or nap in the grass, and I'd think back to that first moment when I found her in the trash, barely alive. It felt like a lifetime ago, and in many ways, it was. She had been reborn, and so had I. Lucky taught me more than any book or lecture ever could. She taught me about trust, how fragile it is, how hard it is to earn, and how beautiful it is when given freely. She taught me about forgiveness, how even those who've suffered the most can still open their hearts. And she taught me about love, the kind that asks for nothing in return, the kind that heals. If you ever see an animal in need, don't look away. It's easy to turn our heads, to tell ourselves that someone else will help, that it's not our responsibility, that we're too busy, too tired, too overwhelmed. But sometimes we are the only chance that creature has. Sometimes we are the difference between life and death, between suffering and salvation. When I found Lucky, I wasn't looking to rescue anyone. I wasn't searching for a cause or a mission. I was just walking. But life has a way of placing us exactly where we need to be, even if we don't realize it at the time. That moment, kneeling in the trash, looking into her hollow eyes, changed me. It reminded me that compassion isn't about grand gestures. It's about small, quiet choices. It's about saying yes when it would be easier to say no. Lucky's story is one of survival, but it's also a story of transformation, hers and mine. She taught me that healing is not a straight line. It's messy, painful, and slow, but it's possible. With patience, with love, with consistency, even the most broken beings can find their way back to life. She reminded me that trust is earned, not given, that it takes time to rebuild what has been shattered. But when it happens, when a creature who once flinched at every sound begins to wag her tail, when she leans into your touch instead of shrinking away, it's one of the most profound experiences you can have. Animals like Lucky don't just need food and shelter, they need dignity. They need to be seen, not as burdens, but as beings with stories, with pain, with hope. They need someone to believe in them when no one else will. And in return, they give us something extraordinary. They teach us to slow down, to be present, to find joy in the simplest things. A nap in the sun, a walk through the grass, a shared moment of quiet. They remind us that love doesn't have to be complicated. It just has to be real. Lucky didn't just survive, she thrived. And in doing so, she became a mirror, reflecting back to me the parts of myself I had forgotten. The parts that were capable of deep empathy, of unwavering commitment, of unconditional love. So if you ever find yourself in a moment like mine, standing before a creature in need, don't walk away. Don't let fear or doubt or inconvenience stop you, because that moment might be the beginning of something beautiful, something life-changing. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to have all the answers. You just have to care. You just have to try, because sometimes the ones we rescue end up rescuing us. They remind us of who we are, of who we can be, of the power we hold, not to control, but to heal, not to dominate, but to uplift, not to judge, but to love. And in a world that often feels cold and chaotic, that kind of love is a light, a beacon, a reason to keep going. So be that light, be that hope, be that second chance, for Lucky, for all the others still waiting, and for yourself.